Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hi, John.
Hey.
Hi, Heather. Nice
Hi,
to see
Heather,
you.
John,
It's a happy yellow wall
Kirsten,
behind
Tony.
you. All right, welcome in, everyone. Nice to see you all. Thank you for coming. We know there's so many demands on your time, so we really appreciate you making time for this. And as we're waiting for people to arrive, I'm going to actually open a poll here, just continuing to figure out ways to collect information in ways that are easy. And so just to begin to know who's here in the room, what county are you representing? That would be great to know, and we can share these out and just get a sense. And then your role identity too. I think today, if all things go according to plan, we'll have breakout rooms by role identity. We'll see. Was the working plan, which sometimes changes in the moment. Good morning to those of you that are coming in. Good morning, everyone. Let me know if you can see the poll. Oh, that's something I hadn't thought about.
I can't answer it, reply to it.
Might be because you're a co-host, Julie.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, you're exactly right.
okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to, but I was.
Yeah, I'm curious. I might have to do this over again. Good old Zoom keeps introducing new features. I'm so sorry. So, sometimes when you come into Zoom, you can't see the chat before you arrive. I'm beginning to wonder. If someone who came in just a second ago, can you let me know if you can see the poll that is up? Can you let me know if you can see the poll that is up? Either come off mute or type in the chat if you can see it. Otherwise, thanks, Sagar. Okay, well, let's see here. It says 7 of 7 answered, but I'm seeing way more people than that in the room here. So I think we're learning, maybe. Yeah. 7 of 11 participated. John, you can see it, but you can't submit. Oh, well, the wonders never cease. Thank you for letting me know. I have no explanation for you.
Huh. Iris Kill Eagle said she saw it and it disappeared.
Okay. Super weird. So you know what I'll do, just because I want to make sure we get representation, is we'll just start over. So nothing like learning together in real time about how things work or don't work. All right, so I'm going to end the poll and then note to self, wait till people get here. So I'll just wait until more folks are here and then we'll try that again. Thank you all. All right, so let's just give another 30 seconds and then we'll try that again.
Oh, here I see Sheldon getting on.
Yeah, great. Welcome. Sheldon's our guest speaker. Hey, Sheldon. Nice to have you.
Good to be on. Apologize, it took me a while to find the link.
Yeah, no worries. We're going to work on getting the calendar invite out. I had this moment this morning, Sheldon. I'm like, and if Sheldon doesn't come, what will we do? So glad you're here. I had a whole backup plan in my head. All right, everyone, let's try the poll again because we wanted to use the poll results in our breakouts today.
Get rid of all that food in the middle that is expired.
I would
Because
just,
council had asked me, they're like, more over April, she's like, it's all expired.
Okay, so here's the poll that's up again. Hopefully y'all can see it. Just continuing to experiment with ways to figure out who's here, so you know who we're with in our community and also who isn't here. And we can continue to ask people to attend. Just weigh in there, that would be great. Okay, got a couple people. Sometimes it's hard when you're on your phone. I'm sorry if that's the case. Okay. One more person, give you 10 seconds here. Okay. So I'll just share the results. I ended the poll a little early, but I want to keep us moving along in our agenda here. So hopefully you all can see. It tells me it's sharing. Can you see it, Julie? Great, thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Head nods. Okay. All right, so that's our representation today. And we'll just keep working on that. Great. Okay. There we are. Okay. So our plan for today is we'll just do what we usually do, a little review of why we're here in case we have some newcomers. Thank you for being here. I want to touch back on the purpose that we have been we worked on ages ago. We want to circle back around to our purpose. We have a presentation from Sheldon and some breakout room discussion based on that presentation. We want to announce a couple changes to our design team and then close out our meeting. So that's our plan for the day. And Julie, I think I'm going to leave the slides down and just roll into sharing a bit about the COP, and you can say how it came to be.
Hey, thank you. I'm Julie Burke, and I'm the coordinator for the Court Improvement Program. So thank you for coming. In the past few years, CIP has been doing work around ICWA with the desire to do something to address the overrepresentation of Native American children and youth in Montana's child welfare system. And as Carrera excuse me, I was gonna say Carrera pointed out, and I knew it was a tongue twister, but as Carrera mentioned during our last meeting in February, nationwide, American Indian and Alaska Native children are overrepresented in foster care at a rate of 2.6 times greater than their proportion in the general population. And in Montana, the rate is even higher at 3.2. So a couple of years ago, a group of attorneys, tribal representatives, judges, and Child and Family Services Division staff formed a committee to learn more about creating a community of practice. And we asked Andy Yost of the Capacity Building Center for Courts to help us create our community of practice. The Center for Courts provides technical assistance to CIPs across the country, and Andy facilitates a national ICWA COP that I believe Sheldon also facilitates. One of the things that Andy asked our original planning committee to do was to develop a list of to-dos and not to-dos. And one thing on the not to-do list was to not create extra work for people who already had full-time jobs and not make this COP too time-consuming for people to actually participate in or too burdensome for people to plan. Some of the things on the must-do list are to invite people we don't usually hear from, promote the uniform application of effective ICWA practices, and co-manage and co-design our time together. So as a result, the purpose of our community of practice is to strengthen relationships and share information and experiences with each other. We are not trying to work on projects as a group, but rather to open our eyes about different perspectives and use that new knowledge or insight to increase our understanding around ICWA practice and to improve our work. In other words, somebody on our design team last month said we want to come together in community to learn and support individual work. So with that, welcome. And I'll turn it back over to Shannon.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Thanks for reminding us about our purpose and the big picture of a place to learn and share and to hear from different voices and perspectives and experiences. It's just such an important part of being able to improve our practice. Let me pick up and talk a little bit about the purpose, because we did some work on the purpose statement together, and it's been a while since we revisited that, and it seemed timely. as we're still forming this community of practice and kind of deciding what is our work and how do we work on it. And this is a lot of things to take in. So let me frame it up and give you a second to read. So in one COP, in October, we put up the proposed purpose that the core team that Julie just described got us started with. Their initial draft was the purpose of the Montana ICWA COP is to improve meaningful collaboration among ICWA legal, social work, and tribal stakeholders to maintain Indian families. And we asked people to spend some time talking in small groups about it. And here are some of the proposed changes. Those are highlighted in green. So I'll stop talking and let you read. And as you can see, people were commenting on 3 different things. There was kind of commentary about the nature of the collaboration. It's engaged and other things. Meaningful collaboration accountability was an idea that we put in, which is hard to do as a community practice in some ways. That tends to apply more to working committees. So that was something we were considering. And then who is involved? We started adding folks in, BIA, people with experience, and talking about kind of what are we trying to achieve and work on together. So reunification and breaking generational trauma and cycles of addiction. So those were some of the things that came in, and we took another stab at that at the December meeting too. And the same types of things started to emerge in terms of, what is the nature of this collaboration? Who is involved? We had some additions like CASA and GAL partners. And then some other ideas started to come in as well around promoting cultural sensitivity and more than just maintain Indian families, to preserve, to uplift, to empower. And so those were some of the additional thoughts that came through the conversations. And so the design team, we talked a bit about how do we reach a final purpose statement, and we wanted to put this forward. I shared this with a few folks, and just in the name of, keeping things going here, is I pulled in the different parts. And so here's what I would propose as the working purpose statement for now. The purpose of the Montana ICWA COP is to foster meaningful, culturally sensitive collaboration among people involved in and affected by ICWA, to preserve and empower Indian families and their connection to their culture, because that was another key idea that came through. So how are we doing on time? I'll stop here for just a minute before we turn it over to Sheldon and just see thoughts. How does this land with you? Maybe we can do a chat, weigh in on this. I see things coming in the chat. Thank you all. Looks good to me. I like it. Let's just do a quick temperature read. So if you like it, love it, type in a 5. If you don't like it, can't live with it, it's a 1. And anywhere in between. So just go ahead and type it in. And if you're a 1, no offense taken. It's really important that we hear that and just continue to revisit it from time to time, right? So our purpose statement is important because it helps us kind of orient to what is our work here. How do we go about, what does it mean to be culturally sensitive, right? That's something that we can organize conversations around. What does it mean to empower Indian families? We can talk about that. So it starts to inform what we do together. Culturally sensitive to culturally humble. Mm. I have a suspicion you'll help us understand what that means today, Sheldon. So thank you. All right. So that was really that was great. So and as I was just saying, you can think about why purpose speaks to why a community or a team or an organization exists. And then you can begin thinking together about, well, what's the what and the how? And as Julie was saying, the original core team was talking about what they must do and this community must do and not do. And I would also say it's probably must learn and must unlearn, right? To be able to achieve your purpose. And so some of the other ideas that came through your discussions, we can hang on to those and put those in some must do's, like promote healing and support reunification. And those places have a home in the what we must learn and unlearn and understand better as a community. And then we can start to think about how do we foster meaningful, culturally sensitive or culturally humble collaboration, hanging on to those important aspects that you highlighted, that this community should share stories and experiences, should share expertise and knowledge. We should listen to one another, and we should bring in some data. That would be great. And have lots of good discussion. So we are making progress as a community. It might feel sort of ambiguous and kind of like it's not and untethered. So we hope it's starting to take shape here for you today a little bit more. And we will keep going. So we're starting to identify our purpose, our principles, how do we want to be, our participants, who needs to be involved, our structure, we're going to talk about design team, and our practices, which is a perfect transition over to Sheldon to be able to talk about his great presentation today. And Sheldon, I realized we didn't talk at all about introducing you. So I think it's over to you to share what feels important to share about your experience and identity and perspective.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, Sheldon Spotted Elk. I'm Northern Cheyenne, Lame Deer, Montana originally. Grew up in the Four Corners area most of my life, however, and now live in Denver, Colorado. I work for Casey Family Programs. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about adaptive change. I'm going to talk to you about, well, really creating and sustaining change and some of the things that, of course, that job's on all of us, so it's not just one person that has that duty. I want to talk about data a little bit. I want to talk about, I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to kind of walk through and hopefully kind of give you some models to kind of consider and think about maybe for this group. And so there's a couple of ways that we could look at this and think about this. And then lastly, we'll do like a Mentimeter and do some polling. So I see that we have a lot of, like 1/3 of the group today is lawyers. So that's great. So I'm a lawyer by training, used to represent kids. And so, and a tribe in ICWA proceedings. So, but it's been a long time ago. But it's good to have you guys on here. First, I want to talk about data, and I'll provide this context for you. So we do have a data that, like the origins of this group is a data related, like we're trying to address disproportionality. And I think it is important for us to kind of think about data. So if I have a goal, I do have a goal that I want to lose 20 pounds. So I need to know how much I weigh today in order for me to lose that 20 pounds. And so in order for us to know exactly what we're doing. And there's a couple of other sources of knowing. So how do we know what we know? And so data, the number, AFGAR's number of American Indians in foster care is one source. I think there's two other sources that we could consider about this. I would say also maybe Court of Appeals decisions, like the legal practice that, and we have a new state ICWA. So that's also a source of knowing. And so if there's like a lot of appeals that are coming back on inquiry, for example, that is the most appealed issue in the whole United States, not Montana necessarily, but the whole United States. The number one issue is inquiry. And so if that's the practice area that we really need to focus in on as a community of practice, that's something that's a source of knowledge for us, is that we're getting a lot of these pills, or there's a special provision within the state ICWA that we need to really hone in on. And then the third source of knowledge, and I think this is probably the most important area of knowledge, is those that are proximate to the practice. And so that's you. So if you're in the courtroom when they say all rise, like you're an important source of knowledge, actually, really important source of knowledge. If you're a lived experience, you went through the system, like we got a real treat and got to hear from Kyle Spang and got to hear a lot of like amazing stuff. That was an amazing source of knowledge. And so that's top shelf right there as far as knowledge goes. This work, of course, has to do with humanities with a capital H. Good news, your job's never going to be replaced by AI. This job can't be done by a kiosk. And so we need humanity in order to do this job right. We need connection. That's what ICWA really is. In law, you'll never see a law that has the values of it are all about connectedness. And so we need you to be a connector. And so that's a little bit what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to share this in the chat too, but I just want to show you this. So this is like, I share this all the time. If you've probably seen me present, I always drop this in the chat every time. So this is a website that tracks AFGARs. And so they do reporting. AFGARs is the national database that tracks all children in foster care. And so you can go up here and click on Montana very specifically. You can see this trend of Montana from 2010 all the way to 2021. And you can see COVID had a big impact on the trajectory of kids in care. But still, Montana has 3,000 kids in foster care. And that's a lot for a state that size. So that's a lot of kids in foster care. We could break this number down a little bit different. And so if you go up here, there's a data display. So we want to look at disproportionality. This is all the United States. And so if we look at American Indians very specifically, it's broken up by race. And then this is the disproportionality index. And so it's a ×3 disproportionality of American Indian American Indians, Alaska Natives in foster care. And so this looks at kids that are exiting or entering foster care and exiting foster care. Those are the 3 bars right there. If we go up here and say, oh, we want to look at Montana very specifically, let's go up here to the drop down, click on Montana, hit go. And so, and this also, so it's the disproportionality number. I know I had to learn this actually. So maybe you're like, how do you measure that? How's that done in math? So it's comparing the under 18 population to the rate of children or the number of kids in foster care. And so we could see that in Montana. So for example, in Montana, we could see that under 18 population is 9.3%. That's what American Indians represent in the state of Montana in general. But in foster care, they represent 36.9% of the kids that are in foster care in the state of Montana. So we're looking at some significant disproportionality here. What that number, if you do the multiplication on that number right there, you're going to say that almost represents ×4 disproportionality in the state of Montana for American Indian youth in foster care. And so there's a couple other ways of breaking this down, but the last one I'll show you. Well, this shows that trajectory. You could break it down by race here. We could see even COVID didn't really impact American Indian youth in foster care. If we go to Montana, what does this look like for us? Go up here. I'll put this in the chat after I'm done. And so you can see COVID actually had an inverse. And so all children in foster care, there was a decline. American Indians rose during COVID. So, and then the last one that I want to show you, just to give you a little bit of context, this shows you by state. And red means there's disproportionality, but this is for white children. So there is disproportionality for white children in some of these states. If we go to American Indians, this whole map's like we can see a lot of these states that have a lot of American Indian populations in it have disproportionality, and we're talking about a lot of disproportionality. Like North Dakota is a ×6. Minnesota is always the highest, ×14 disproportionality in Minnesota. But some of these states like Nebraska, Iowa, like you can see there's a lot of disproportionality in some of these states. Alaska, significant, and so I'll drop this in the chat just so, and then I don't know, maybe you guys could send this out to everybody just so you can look at it. It's something that, like I said, if my goal is to lose 20 pounds, I need to look at the scale today to see kind of where I'm at. There's another approach that we could do with this too, is like we could have what is called the root cause analysis, and we could talk about, like, I think the best way of comparing that is like once again, we're trying to find out, how do we know what we know? So why, we could ask that question. Why is there so many American Indians in foster care? What's the disproportionality? And we could think about it is there a practice issue? Maybe there's this bad lawyering and judging, maybe that's, I'm just throwing stuff out there. So no, maybe there's a bad social work, so like we kind of go through this whole thing and kind of figure out and break it down. I like to actually use this metaphor. Like if I'm asking, why did I burn my cookies? My cookies were burned. I put them in, they always come out burned. Maybe I get the recipe wrong. Maybe it's me, a user error. Maybe my oven is broken actually. And so maybe it cooks really hot. And so we're really kind of going through all these steps of why we're trying to address this problem. And so that could be another thing that we do in the future of a root cause analysis and kind of consider what is the exact area we need to look at. And that's something we're going to do today a little bit. But I do want to provide you one, put this in the chat. Just give me 1 second. And if you ever want to have that kind of conversation, or you really want to dig deep with data, oh, thank you, Shannon, for putting it in the chat. So I didn't see that till now. So one, we could really kind of have a deep dive into that of how a family ends up in foster care is a really complicated issue sometimes. The front door and how do we control that front door is a big part of it as well. So us kind of thinking about that is something that I think we could kind of dedicate our minds to. We have a lot of smart people in this room too to figure that out. I have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to do that PowerPoint if that's okay, and then we're going to have a conversation with a Mentimeter and kind of think about it. So I originally did this presentation for Yellowstone County, and I see some of my friends are on this call here. And so you're like, oh my God, we're gonna have to hear this again. So appreciate you bearing with me and hearing this one more time. Hopefully I have a little bit of a different angle to bring on this. But when we talk about creating and sustaining changes, everybody loves cats, right? So the yin and yang of cats, unless you're allergic to cats like I am, I guess. But the yin and yang of change, of creating and sustaining change, is really having technical policies in place and then also adaptive approaches. And so when we talk about what is adaptive approaches and what are technical approaches, and we see this with ICWA courts, honestly, and we always see this with ICWA courts. And so maybe we get feedback that, hey, when you send an inquiry to my tribe, you have insufficient information there. We can't make a determination of whether this child's a member or not because your form is bad. So you need to edit your form. So there's a technical issue about the process. And so we need to fix that form. Sometimes we centralize dockets. I would say that's a technical thing. Court administration is a technical thing. How we're collecting data. So maybe we don't have the right information for us to kind of make a wise decision on how to make an intervention. And legal compliance, I would also say that. And so ICWA compliance, I always say there's 7 findings that happen within an ICWA case. So the checkbox of whether you're complying with those 7 findings in a court of law, I would say that's a technical thing. So, and I don't need to even say this out loud, but I will say it out loud. You could get ICWA right and still do terrible things to American Indian families. You could get the law right, check all the boxes, and still do terrible harm to American Indian families. And so that's something I think for us to reflect on. And so it's more than just compliance. It's a lot of our hearts and minds. And so when we talk about the spirit of ICWA, I always think about this. The spirit of ICWA is really about our hearts and minds. I did that wrong, I know, our minds and our hearts. So it's really how we show up and interact with humanity. How we're being cognizant of our biases, how we're showing up with compassion, I think first for ourselves and then for others. So these are some things that are adaptive. So how we collaborate, build relationships of trust, listen to lived experience, and ultimately how we feel and think about these issues. And so those are the adaptive things. Adaptive things are actually deeper than technical things. Like you kind of think about it, if the lawyers in the room, like I know that probably the first time you went to court, it might have been a little bit awkward, first time you filed and argued a motion, it might have been a little bit awkward, that's a technical thing. But now it's probably just old hat, so it's like, you could learn that, you could teach anybody to do that, really. And so, become proficient at it. Of course, there's a whole nother level of becoming great at that. But just learning the technical aspects of it, almost anybody can learn that. But as far as adaptive approaches, those are some things that we really have to examine within ourselves and be thoughtful of. I always put this in there. Let me share one more thing. And so about this, let me go back there before I share that next slide. One of my favorite books out there is this book written by a guy named Sheldon Solomon. I like his first name. But he's a social psychologist. And he wrote about terror management theory. It's like this theory that how we manage terror, and very specifically how we manage the concept of dying. And so there's a whole bunch of nuance around this, but the short of it, he goes and he does all these social science experiments. And so he'll go and interview one instance that I'm going to tell you right now is he interviewed these judges in Pima County in Tucson, Arizona. They're municipal court judges. And so he's trying to see what kind of impact does death have when we think and reflect about our death. What kind of impact does that have on us? And he ended up finding out that there's a lot of evidence that supports that when we reflect on our death, we end up making really, if people look different from us, if they're a different race, a different religion, we end up kind of making these really bad decisions for those people. We other those people more than we normally do when we think about our death. And so the Pima County study was about these municipal court judges. They had a crime of morality. They said, all right, here's hypothetical. Half you judges, I want you to write your obituary. The other half, I want you to write a laundry list. And now I want you to do a bail hearing for a case of prostitution. And so it's this case of morality. There's some moral implications in there. And they found out judges that reflected on their death set the bail at 9 times higher than the judges that thought about their laundry list. And so what are the ways that we mitigate our bias in this? Sheldon Solomon argues that us being just aware of our bias, like us being willing to look ourselves in the mirror and say, do what I have biases in this work. Like I have a concept when I hear a good parent or bad parent, I have to admit I have a bias with that. And so being aware of that and looking ourselves in the mirror, or hey, I don't really know too much about American Indians, and this is what TV's told us about American Indians. I have to admit that I have a bias around that. And so being able to look ourselves in the mirror in that and feel those uncomfortable feelings is a mitigating factor for our bias and how we work. And so being aware of it is the first step. And so I do want to celebrate Yellowstone County. And so this was some information that was shared with me at the Yellowstone County dinner in 2022. And so if we do these comparisons to the AFGARs, I probably need to update these AFGARs here. And so if we look at what Montana is doing generally with permanency outcomes, you can see that compared to the Yellowstone ICWA court, those outcomes are incredible what Yellowstone County is doing. If you have that, if you could find your clapping hands emoji on your Zoom, it's a good time to put that up there right now because this is great outcomes right here. Reunification, nearly 20% higher than the state of Montana. Guardianships outcomes higher. Termination parental rights lower. So all the outcomes that we want is happening in Yellowstone County. So there's some magic there for us to kind of really reflect and learn from. They've been featured in the Associated Press. They've been featured in other places. Really proud of the work and some of those attorneys are on the call right now. So I'm really impressed with their work and the way that they show up and do their work. So it's something that needs to be celebrated. So this was a study, now another data point here, and I'll hopefully connect this to adaptive change. And so this was a study that was the baseline measures study. Yellowstone County was included in this study, but 4 other ICWA courts were included. So Denver, Adams County, which is a suburb just of Denver, St. Louis County, which is Duluth, Minnesota, and Ramsey County, which is St. Paul, Minnesota. So they went and collected all this data. some of these jurisdictions had pre-ICWA court data, so they were able to kind of do a little bit of an analysis here of saying, oh, what's making ICWA court practice different? And so, excuse me. So the two things that I always like to focus in on is one, they found that a tribe being present. So if this is a data point that improves compliance, if a tribe is in the room at the initial hearing, that shortens permanency by 125 days. And so that might be a practice point for us. And so we could imagine like, wow, if that's the data outcome, how do we increase tribal participation? How do we remove those barriers? And so what are the barriers that need to be removed by state courts, by the inquiry and notice process? So that front end of an ICWA case, how do we make sure we're asking the question? How do we make sure that we're sending proper inquiry and notice? And so we're speeding up that front end of the case. Tribal ICWA directors, if you're on right now, and this is something when I work for the Ute Indian tribe, we wanted to speed up that process of our process as we had to interact with enrollment. And so we wanted to speed up that process. So we brought enrollment in the room and said, hey, this is what our issue is. How can we speed up this front end process and make some determinations as quick as we possibly can on our side when we receive an inquiry and notice? How do we make sure that we're responding to that as fast as we possibly can? So if we know that that has that type of outcome, like that really needs to be a practice area that we really need to, as a community to practice, really kind of work on. Reunification. And so very specifically mothers. And so not only the tribe being at the initial appearance, but if a mother participates in the court hearing, the return to home is, and this is the most significant correlative factor when we talk about reunification, a mother's participation in the court hearing. And so how do we make sure that mothers are being seen? There's another data study, and I know I'm just like wrapping off all these data studies, and you're like, Sheldon, we'll believe it when we read it ourselves. And if you want to read these, I could send them all to you. But there's a study out there on quality hearings. What is a quality child welfare hearing? Very specifically. So if we have any judges on here, but I do think this applies to social workers, it applies to tribal workers, it applies to lawyers, is how we interact with parents has a significant outcome of whether they want to return back to court or not, you know. And so sometimes we know that our parents are experiencing mental health issues, they're experiencing addiction issues. There's a lot of shame dynamics that are always happening with this process. And so you could only imagine if you were in that seat, if somebody didn't even acknowledge you or they dismissed some things that you said, you're thinking, oh, man, why would I even show up to that? Because that I'm just going to be abused more. It's going to be a more trauma experience for me. I don't want to even show up to those hearings just because it causes me anxiety to prep for it. They end up being terrible. So this data study is about the breadth and depth of how judges interact with parents in that first hearing. Has significant impacts of whether they show back up. You know, it also impacts kinship placement. It also impacts reduction and termination of parental rights. So there's all these positive things that we want for our cases that happen if a judge just has a breadth and depth conversation with a parent in that first hearing, and so willing to listen to them, and I think that's applicable to all of us. So how we engage with parents and children was a significant thing. So now we think about so those are the data outcomes that lead to our practice, and we want to change things. I'm ripping those from somebody else, and so we look at the 6 conditions of systems change, and we kind of talked about it. And this is done in a reverse pyramid, of course, but at the very top, these are things that are really technical things that are really kind of easy to do if you really think about it. And so policies and how we improve policies and practices, resource flows, and so funding sometimes is that's more of a challenge. I know, excuse me, but how do we make sure that these things are in place? Those are structural changes. We go a little bit deeper in this. What we're doing right now, I would say, is relationships and connections. And so we're meeting with people throughout the state. We're saying, oh, this person does what I do, and they live across the state, and how do we partner? How do I learn from them? And how do I share the good things that I know? Power dynamics. And we've noticed this in ICWA courts is, you know, like this small things like judges willing to come off the bench, like from a raised dais, you know, they're willing to come off the bench and interact, doing stakeholder meetings, and so willing to share power. Those are significant things. And you might not think, oh man, I don't even realize, is that a big thing? But they end up being significant things about how we share power. And you might think to yourself like, oh, what kind of power do I have? You have power. The fact that you're in this room right now, I promise you have a decision-making power on a lot of this process. And so it might not feel like it sometimes, I know, but all of us in this call here, we have power, so. And then the last thing is these mental models. And really those are the adaptive things that we're talking about. And these are the most significant things. And so how we think and feel about this. I typically sometimes will tie this in like the dictionary definition of meme. And so we've all had memes before from the social media, or somebody texts us a meme. But the dictionary definition, it comes from the word memetics. It comes from a psychologist, a philosopher that came up with that term. And so like genetics, memetics is the passing of an idea, not a passing of a gene through genetics, but a passing of an idea that could become viral, like genetics, like a gene could become. And so an idea could simply spread really broad quickly. And I argue that American Indian families being attacked has become a meme in the United States of America. There's been explicit policies about disrupting American Indian families for over 200 years. We looked at the disproportionality table, still happening today. It's become an idea that's spread. And so the way that we view American Indian families, the way that we shame them, this is a meme that exists in our culture. And so it's something that we have to be really conscious and thoughtful about in order to address that mental model to change the way that we approach families. And I know sometimes maybe this conversation might be a little uncomfortable. That's part of the process. That's part of the healing process, right? Just going through that uncomfortableness and feeling that and really being cognizant of that. So another way of kind of thinking about this, and so I'm providing this a little bit just so we can kind of think about this, is really the interaction of all these things. All these things have interactions with one another in the cultural cycle of the ways that we interact with ideas, like we're talking about those memes that are really deep in us, in about who's moral, who's good, who's powerful, like those ideas. And sometimes it's very explicit, like if you walk into a courtroom, there's only one person in the room on a raised dais, they're in a robe and they're leading everything. And so it's not hard to figure out who has power in that room. But also the other way that we defer power in some instances. Oh, that person has this degree or doesn't have this degree. And so all those different things, assumptions that we have, and how that interacts with institutions, how that interacts with our collaboration or interactions, and then even us as an individual. I do want to make sure that you feel in this whole process. You guys are so lucky, because if you're in person, I'd make you guys shout back to me, I'm an agent of change, and you don't want me to do that. So, but really us being agents of change, us being able to show up in ways that we could effectuate and have impact on this system. And so for us to be really thoughtful of this process and how our ideas and our practices that have significant impacts on institutions and even address disproportionality like we're doing today. So we do have an impact on this. The last thing I'll share as far as models, and I'm showing a lot of models here. This is something I got. I'm proud of this actually, but we did this in Minnesota over 4 sessions. And so Minnesota has 6 ICWA courts. And so we're really asking the question, what does an ICWA court in Minnesota mean? So what does that exactly mean? And so if you look at these 5 principles of an ICWA court, how these originally was 4 principles, and this came out of a meeting that happened and some of you guys were at that meeting in Denver, Colorado in 2016. So we brought at the time all the ICWA courts together. There was only 5, brought them all in the room, and we had a conversation about what is an ICWA court. These are the 4 principles that came to fore was data, like we have to know that we're making progress, judicial leadership, training on both the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, and then tribal collaboration. And so those are the 4 principles of ICWA court. The 5th one kind of came a couple of years later, is that if this is the gold standard, if ICWA is the gold standard of child welfare, our work should be gold standard. So lawyering should be gold standard, judging should be gold standard, social work should be gold standard. And so what does that exactly mean? And so what was really cool about this and why I like the process of this is that it all started off with storytelling. And so that's a significant mental model. It's the stories that we tell. And so we'd ask a question like on judicial leadership. We'd say, all right, I want everybody to think about an example of effective leadership in your life. And so it doesn't have to be a judge. It doesn't have to be a professional even, it could be your basketball coach, it could be your cheerleading coach, it could be a mentor that you have. So who are these leaders that really had impact and effective leadership? And then we'd do breakout rooms and I would tell you my story and then you would tell me your story and we'd both really listen, engage listening in that process. And then we'd deduct some principles of that. Oh yeah, what you're saying is sounds like humility was a big part of that great leadership that you saw, that person's willing to be humble and listen. And we'd come out with these principles. And throughout those 4 sessions, we ended up translating into these practice areas. And so this is the rubric or the practice model that we ended up developing in the state of Minnesota of what it means to be an ICWA court in Minnesota. And so we kind of look through that. And I could share this slide. But the last thing I want to share before we do this Mentimeter exercise, and hopefully this Mentimeter will also give us a little bit of guidance about maybe our next steps with this group. But this is something I got to work with a guy that does motivational interviewing. So and some of you guys I know have seen this probably like multiple times now at this point. The courtroom in the back is Judge Tarnowski's courtroom. And Judge Tarnowski passed away last year, tragically. But she's kind of I think her and Judge Souza are really the pioneers and the work that you're doing in Yellowstone County. Like you guys are all the pioneers of what ICWA courts are and where they're going. But Judge Tarnowski, she is the judge that would come off the raised dais and sit at these tables. So you can kind of see her seat right there. The tribes were collaborating so much so that they gave medicines. And so every time the ICWA court happened, they would put their medicines in the middle of the courtroom. Because when you talk about children, it's a sacred thing. And everybody got to talk. Everybody had power at that table and got to speak. And so we were thinking about how do we reset our mind? And so how do we change our mental models when it comes to this work? And we came up with this little acronym here about resetting our mind. And so it's the right to be heard, it's right, empathy, us being solution oriented, equipping with real resources. And so having real resources that families could use and access, and ultimately we want families to thrive. And so when we think about our work, we've all had this practice, and so we've had family A and family B, and maybe they had the exact same judge, and maybe they got the exact same case management. The disposition of their case was the exact same case management plan, case plan. And we saw family A, maybe they attached to their attorney, they engaged in this process, and they trusted their social worker, and it ended up in success. And then we saw family B struggle, not trust their attorney, not connect with their social worker, and we saw their balloon struggle and ultimately not succeed. And so we could ask ourselves, what's the variance? And so thinking about that variance between family A and family B, why did A succeed and why did B struggle? Why did they have lift and why did B have drag? It's easy for us to kind of think about our role in that. Like if I was a parent's attorney and I was representing mom or dad in that process, it might be easy for me to say, do you want mom or dad from family A, they're just good people. And family B, they're bad people. So it's all them. And there's nothing really I could do about that. They're just good and bad people. And so I could wash my hands for it, not think about it anymore. My role in that was insignificant. But what could we do in that process? And I think context and us showing up with context and understanding motivation is the most significant thing that we could do to promote lift and not be a drag. I know we all have difficult cases, so I'm not saying this is all on you, of course, but just we're heavily, as human beings, we're heavily influenced by context. Really understanding people's motivations is something that we can do and really kind of guide them through that whole process. That's the whole idea around motivational interviewing. I don't know if anybody on here is a therapist, and I'm not trying to teach you all to be therapists or anything. I don't even know. I'm not a therapist, so I'm not even trying to do that. So, but just some of these principles of motivational interviewing and how we talk to one another would be a significant lift in people's lives. But if we take a step back and we think about the context of these cases that we participate in, there's internal and external contexts that promote lift. And so we think about that in the grand scheme of things, we have resources, family that poverty is the most connective things of why families are in foster care. So oftentimes rich families don't go through this process. I think there's a lot of reasons why that, I think. I'm going to go back. And so, yeah, rich families don't go through this. Some of the entryways into the system, of course, is access to healthcare, access to employment, access to housing, access to education, and ultimately access to justice. And so these are all external things that sometimes we don't necessarily have control of because of the system that sometimes is bigger than us, but we're of course part of the system. And so, but internal things, and the one thing that I would really like to focus in on is this motivation thing. So internally, a big promotion for us, a big lift for us is really understanding our motivation and showing up with confidence, commitment, ability to problem solve, knowledge and skills, plan, vision. Those are all things that sometimes we, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a therapist, or whether you're a social worker, or you're a court administrator, these are some things that we can help kind of improve and increase. But then we think about these things that are drags. And so these external things, of course, not having resources, almost all the opposite of all that. Abuse, exploitation, discrimination, judgment, isolation, cruelty. You think about the families that end up in the system, and you think about all these things, right? Like they're experiencing all these things, these external drags that are impacting their life. But their internal drags, like sometimes I talked about mental illness, addiction, these are all real. Racism, sexism, these are real things that impact. Like I said, willingness to show back up to court. If you hit these racisms and sexism right at the very beginning, you're like, man, that sucks. I don't want to go back to that. That was a terrible experience. I hated that. It made me feel terrible. Low confidence, uncertainty. These are areas that are very internal to the process. And so, any questions that you might have about some of that? If not, we're going to do like a Mentimeter right now. And I have 3 questions for our Mentimeter. So I would need you to get out your cell phone. And you're just going to scan this when it comes up on the screen. So let's get your cell phone. You're going to turn on your camera and it will give you a link. If you don't have your cell phone or you don't have anything like that, there is a website that you can log into. So let me pull that up right now. So you want to scan this in right here. So the first question is, why do you do this work? So if you pull your cell phone up, you go on that QR code in the corner, it'll click in. And so this is a scaling question. So it's a 1 out of 5. And so I'm asking you why you do this work. So you could say, oh, to help protect children and families, help protect children. That's my number 1 motivation of doing this work. I give that a 5. Or I don't really care about that. I give that a 1. So it's a scaling question. 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. So it's not order. So these are all 5. So we've kind of seen everybody's come in right now.
As you're watching, Sheldon, we have 25 people on the call, just to help you know.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sorry, I see people are putting stuff in the chat too. So
I'm watching that for you too, so I'll let you know. I know it's hard to present and do all the things.
We'll give it just a couple more seconds to just to reflect and think about this first question here. And even you, Shannon, if you could answer these questions too, so.
Sheldon, we have Bobby struggling to scan the QR code. We could just respond in chat if that feels comfortable too,
Okay,
is what I would say. Unless you have another, if you have like triage.
yeah, I'm sorry, I told you there was a website. Let me go back to the website. So there is this website right here. So if you go to menti.com and you enter in this code. Wait for Bobby and then we'll go to the next question. So if you go to this website, enter in 18, 41, 25, 24. That's the code.
I put that in chat too.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah.
We could kind of see this right now is that 4.9 out of 5 is help and protect children is the motivation of why you're doing this work. If you want to come off, I know I just put these 4 questions here kind of for us to think about our motivations about this work. And so what are other things that are not on this list that you could either put in the chat or you come off and talk about? See that supporting my financial needs is the lowest. Of course, nobody's going to get rich doing this work. So I could see why that's not the number one motivating factor. ICWA actually is a really challenging law. Actually, there's a lot of nuance to that law. It gets appealed quite a bit. So I do think there is a challenge for you legal practitioners and social work practitioners on the call. You know, there are some challenging things about this law that if that's your motivation, you're in the right place. You know, this is a very challenging law sometimes. And so we'll do quality work efficiently, accurate and efficiently. So that was the second one. So what else did I miss? Is anybody putting anything in the chat?
Yeah, I don't know, Katie, if you want to come off and share, but Katie said it's not just protecting children, but families.
I like that comment. Thank you, Katie. I think sometimes this work, even me right here, you know, like I develop these questions and put the emphasis always on children, you know, like, but it really is about families.
A couple other of Mina saying help and protect and be a voice. And then Bobby, quality work.
Awesome.
Thanks for weighing in.
All right, we're going to go to the next question. So yeah, thank you, everybody. So I told you earlier that there's 7 areas of an ICWA case. So if we think about the technical areas, I want you to kind of reflect on your practice. Like, where can we improve ICWA? And so this is also a scaling question. So you can kind of think about, we do inquiry of Indian children. We do that really well. You know, that's a 5 versus we don't do that very well at all. That's a 1, you know. So like kind of thinking about your practice areas on all these areas. I know there's only 6 on here. The 7th area is jurisdiction. So making sure that you have proper jurisdiction is the 7th area of this. And sometimes that is an issue in Montana, of course. And so if a child is a ward of Northern Cheyenne Tribal Court, the Yellowstone County ICWA Court doesn't have jurisdiction over that case. And so proper jurisdiction is the 7th area, but I left it off there intentionally. So thinking about the question exactly is like, so a 5 means we do this really well, or the highest is we do this very, very well. And the lowest is we don't do it very well. So I want you to kind of think about your practice, how we do these areas of ICWA, the technical areas of ICWA. And I'll tell you, this kind of ends up kind of being a roadmap for us. And so we're seeing, well, transfer the tribal clerk. That doesn't happen. That might be an area that we can improve if that's something we really want to work on, you know, like, or we're seeing this is moving around so quick for me, you know, like, oh, QEWs, that's not an area we do very well on. So this could really help us direct our community of practice. hope, so sorry, I'm not explaining that very well. I saw somebody answered the opposite, so. so, yeah, so just kind of thinking about that is like the highest on this, the very high is like, we're doing this really, really well. Active efforts, my jurisdiction, in my practice, I see that happening, and that's great, it's very high. Or my jurisdiction and my practice, do it, I forgot that was even an area of the law, so I guess I'm not doing it very well. It's a zero, you know, it's a low. So it's supposed to think about that. So it looks like the highest here is active efforts, that we feel like that's our best area of practice. And the lowest is transfer to tribal court. Sometimes that's really kind of out of our control too. So that might be an area that, so if we take that one off, QEW and evidentiary standards and notice to tribes are the two lowest ones.
A couple of comments in the chat, Sheldon, one from Ray Lynn about she's a CPS worker, and I feel like our biggest downfall is who is used as our QEW, and if they are really dialed into the specific tribe represented.
Thank you for that comment. That's a great comment right there.
And then Mina is, feels like improving in placement based on their personal family experience.
Thank you for sharing that.
Bobby's continuing to struggle with Menti. Sorry, Bobby. It's so frustrating when you want to participate in technology and it won't do its thing.
Sorry, Bobby. If you want to comment on here as far as like Bobby to say, hey, do you want, yeah, thank you. Yeah, active reference is extremely important. Or if you want to also say, do you want, this is an area that could be improved. So, like things like placement preferences, that's something we could use. There's another way of measuring that too. Like, so we could pull some data to find out what is the rate of kinship placement. And so with American Indians in the state of Montana, we could pull that and we could see how well, what is the report card here? You know, we might think we're kicking butt, but when we look at the numbers, we realize we're not doing very well, you know, so this is, there's other ways of kind of finding this out, right? So like I was saying earlier, like, I appreciate your comments on this, Mina, because like I said, the most valuable comment, the most valuable area of knowing is lived experience, you know, so you're saying it's my personal experience that we don't do very well on here. And I'm sure you have a story to tell about that. That could really influence the way that workers interact with this, courts handle this work, you know, so you have the golden ticket with your personal experience. The data number, it's reducing humans to a number. And that's sometimes not very good. It doesn't really tell the full story, of course. All right, we'll go to the last question. And so these are adaptive approaches. And so, of course, this is not comprehensive. I don't have everything on here. So I want you to think about your work or your jurisdiction and think about how do we do on these adaptive approaches? And this is, once again, a scaling question. And so the highest being cultural, like we kick butt on cultural humility, you get very high. Like we're terrible on that area. Give it a 0, you know, so thinking about the scaling question on this. And so this is not comprehensive, like I said, so if there's other areas that you're thinking about, like, oh, you know, Sheldon, you need to add this, please put that in the chat if there's an area that this is an adaptive approach that we need to really address. And this really, like I said, can really create a work plan for us and how we do the next steps of our community of practice. So we're seeing right now addressing racial bias is the lowest right there. That's something for us to be really reflective on. So how do we make sure we're learning about that and being able to share about that, and we become leaders when it comes to that area, these adaptive approaches. Culturally relevant services is low there too. So how do we broaden our service array when it comes to culturally relevant services? It might be a little bit more complex, but something we definitely could do. Makes me happy to see tribal partnerships is the highest one on here. And we might think to ourselves, like, there's levels to all this, of course, and so if that's our highest, and you're saying, oh, we do really well on that, but how's the power dynamics within those relationships? That might be something for us to examine. Like when you set the table, who's at the head of the table? Who's actually setting the table? So like we might be really thoughtful about some of these things about power dynamics. In our next few meetings, we could consider some of these things. Is there things that I missed? If there is, please put it in the chat.
Nothing showing up yet. Nina says compassion.
Right.
And Raylan too. We have 3 tribes in my region, and they are all so different in their traditions. And I wish we could have more training about how they differ and what we can do to be more mindful of the differences.
That probably could be under a lot of, but yeah, thank you for calling that out directly. That could be connected to racial bias. That could be connected to cultural humility. I know, like, maybe I've made this point before, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but the difference between cultural competency and cultural humility, and even cultural sensitivity, like, and we kind of really think about those words, and I can't help it because I'm a lawyer, and that's what we do. Is we look at words, but when you really kind of dig deep into what those words actually mean, it's almost impossible to become competent in all people's cultures, like, and so me, I'm Northern Cheyenne. If you want to learn about what it's like to be a Northern Cheyenne father living in Denver, Colorado, you'd probably have to interact with me. Actually, you'd have to be willing to listen to me, and so there's not a Wikipedia page for that. There's not like a learning module for that. It actually involves direct interaction. But that's the key skill there is actually humility, and so being willing to listen and engage. That's the key distinction between competency and humility. I appreciate that comment. All right.
Jen is just underscoring that, Sheldon, in terms of what Raylan was saying about trainings on the differences in understanding.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen and Raylan, for calling that out. What I was hoping to do right now is, like, we could do some breakout groups, and I'd like, so when the other point that I'd like to bring up, when we talk about community of practice, and I'm sorry, I'm an old Indian man now, so I always make everything a metaphor to basketball. So it's my weakness. And so like basketball, if we have a community of practice of basketball, so if we're all going to go to the gym and shoot jump shots, we're going to work on our jump shots, and so we could all do that. But if this community is so broad and it is about basketball, so we might have some fans that are in the room right now. So I don't shoot jump shots. I'm actually a fan, or I'm a statistician, or I'm a referee. And so we want to break this up into those different groups. And so if you're a jump shooter, we're going to put you in a jump shooter room. If you're somebody that keeps the stats, we want you to go in that room and kind of really thinking about it from your perspective about about the next steps that we could possibly take in both adaptive and technical. Think about those two cats cuddling up together, the black cat and the white cat cuddling up together, and how do we create and sustain change? So
let's see, Sheldon, I have the breakout rooms set up. And so the question, what are the technical and adaptive next steps we might take?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know we dropped a lot of like we got some data, we thought about some of the Montana data. We saw disproportionality data. You might consider some of that. Once again, how do we know what we know? And then what are our next steps for that? And so, okay. They could be adaptive, or they could be technical. So for you to consider some of those things that we had a lot of conversation about. Is there any questions before we do the breakout rooms?
And let's see, so just to talk through time a little bit, Sheldon, it's already 10:10. So it's going to be kind of a shorter breakout room. You want to do 10 minutes so we then have a chance, a few minutes to share a few thoughts before we wrap up?
Perfect, let's do that.
Okay. And the way we have the breakout room set up, everyone, is that you can join whichever breakout room you like. So I'm going to open them and you can see that they're open and hopefully you can see that they're named. We have attorneys, judges, child welfare, CASA, QEW, tribes, Indian families. So, and if you don't relate or identify to any one of those, go where you like, is what I would say. Is that what you would say, Sheldon?
Yeah, that's what I'd say as well. And then if you go to one and like you're the only person there, please join another one. So
Yeah. All right. So you may choose your room and have a good conversation.
we'll be back in 10 minutes.
And I'll hang here.
I'm struggling getting connected to a group.
Oh, okay. Is that Mike? You just said that, Mike?
Yeah,
Where would you
I've
like
been
to
getting
go? Which room?
I'm with child welfare, so I don't know.
Put
if
you over
there's-
there. Right now, it looks like you're the only. Oh, no, there's one other person. So I'll send you over there.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else unsure or having tech problems I can help?
No
Hi.
option is coming up for me. I don't know whether that's because I had to join late because of court, but
Oh, that might be happening, Valerie. What group are you wanting to join?
well, I'm an attorney.
I will put you there, Valerie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Mina. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Mina.
Hi. So I was invited to these initially as a QEW, and I went to the QEW training, and I've shadowed a couple of cases with Carrie Covers Up. And so I'm not quite sure where I should go because I haven't really done a QEW. Should I just go into that room or?
I think that might be good. If you're, yeah, I think that might be good. If there's nobody in there, you could join any other room that you want.
It's three.
Okay.
There's three QEWs.
Oh, great.
Okay.
All right, I will send you there.
Okay, thank you.
Joan, can we help you get somewhere? I can't hear you. Hi, Kirsta. I think Kirsta's in. Can you hear us, Kirsta?
I can. I went in CASA and nobody was there. I was waiting to see
Oh,
if
yeah, you
anyone.
were all alone. Where else would you like to go?
Nobody else is going to be in CASA.
It doesn't look like it.
Okay, why don't I go into? I can put myself in there. I'll go into
Okay.
QEW. Thanks.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Hey, Shannon?
Yes,
Joan,
I
we
can't
can't
hear
hear you.
Joan.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I can't either.
Take care of Joan. Are you able to use chat, Joan? That would be hard in a room too. Oh, that's so frustrating. Sorry, Joan. All right.
Is that what we were hoping to do? What we did?
So you have a lot of QEW. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
It's like the popular room right there.
Yeah, 2 in child welfare, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in attorneys.
And I'll send you the PDF of our adaptive and technical approaches. So
Yeah, great. I'll send that out in the follow-up. And then also maybe if you have the link or a copy of that data study about how judges interact.
Yeah, I'll send that out too.
People will be interested in that too.
Breadth and depth study.
Yeah.
I'll even share a link to The Worm at Its Core, my favorite book.
Good. I was thinking I made a note to myself to send you a link to another model since you like models, and I think you were saying you got a lot out of business. So when I'm not facilitating, I do org development, org design, uh, team development type work. And so there's something called the STAR model that I think you might enjoy that just talks about like what are the things that need to be working together. And so it calls out like structure, government, process, people. So you could put that in your back pocket.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
I'm doing some national work on mandated reporting.
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot to learn from, like I just read this study that, have you ever heard of the app, like the app on your phone called Nextdoor?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are you on it?
Remember. Uh-huh.
So I didn't know about it until I read the study. And so like the CEO of it, a black woman that took over, she I guess there's a big problem on Nextdoor, I guess, with people reporting like, hey, there's a brown man walking his dog. High alert, you know, like, so you end up getting all this really racist stuff. And it's very similar to mandated reporting, of course. And so like, oh man, there's a safety issue. There's a brown kid by himself at the playground. I'm called CPS, you know, like, and so it kind of ends up like really kind of revealing our biases. And so when it's unhinged, like an app like that or mandated reporting, there's a high level there. And so sometimes I think there's technical solutions to adaptive problems. And so they reduced racial over-reporting on Nextdoor by 75% by making people reflect on two questions. I think did I already share this with you? I'm so sorry.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah, so and that's something I think really kind of think about is like I thought I brought this up next when we were doing our check-in. But really just they'll have people look in the mirror before they hit send, you know. So it's like would I report this if this was one of my relatives and is race a factor in the reason that I'm reporting this? And so really calling it out. And then the second thing was, can you very specifically describe the safety concern that or the threat that you're articulating? Is it just a black man walking a dog down the street? Or is there actually a safety thing that you're really concerned about, you know? So
Oh my gosh, that is so good. Hmm. Yeah. I wonder how much of that is getting built into manager training and things like that, because they always skirt that. There's always DEI efforts and organizations happening elsewhere, but it's not integrated into like the actual processes, speaking of the STAR model.
yeah.
And not into the training. Yeah, it's just like over there, we deal with that.
Right. The other thing I was kind of thinking of, one of my mentors kind of pointed this out to me. And I end up doing a lot of trainings too, especially like about adaptive things like compassion and cultural humility. But like when you say these things, nobody in the room, even when you say racist, like nobody wants to be a racist, you know, like that's not a cool thing to be, you know, like unless you wear a sheet with a hood. But even Donald Trump, you know, even Donald Trump doesn't want to be a racist. He's got on record like, I'm not a racist, you know. So even him, as deplorable and as racist as he in his own mind doesn't think that he's a racist. So I think going through the front door and saying, hey, racism's bad, or hey, we should have more compassion, everybody's going to say, yeah, we agree with
compassion. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think sometimes you have to go through the back door and talk about what are the barriers that prevent you from showing up in those ways, you know, like, and I have a high caseload. It's too much time to be compassionate with every client, you know. I have a high caseload. It's not feasible, you know, so that there could be like a lot of different barriers that we could kind of like think about that prevent us from being our very best and different things, you know. So
And I always appreciate questions that I don't bump into very often. So my mentors at Holistic Resistance, they're more kind of for, African heritage racism, like really confronting that within myself. But the questions work everywhere. But they asked me questions like, who taught you the value of Black women in your life? How did you learn the value of Black men in your life? How did you learn the value of Native Americans in your life? And so then you start looking at all the ways and all the messages and all the places, and you're like, whoa, I got a lot in here, actually. I've got a ton of messages about stuff, about people. So yeah, I think those questions that make you connect it to your life, be like, oh, yeah,
Yeah, that's
I
good
have
point.
those. Yeah. So it says the breakout rooms are done. You want to give them like, they have, when I close them, they have 1 more minute. Yeah, we better wrap up.
Yeah.
We're short. We'll do quick. You can do just a quick harvest, however you like, and then I'll bring us home.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right, we're coming back. Would somebody want to like volunteer and share his, are we all back? I guess some people jumped off. So-
Wait, some people are still in rooms because the
Oh.
time wasn't quite up, which I think they're having good conversations.
Oh, good.
Now they will be made to come back.
All right.
Okay.
Well, good. Does anybody is willing to share some of their thoughts or considerations about how we take this community practice to the next level? How do we really dig deep? What did you guys talk about? How about my friend Heather? Can I cold call you?
Hi, Sheldon. Okay, we talked about a number of things, but one of them being what are some technical steps that we could take? And from my perspective in Yellowstone, one of the things that we could do is be more consistent about sending the pre-hearing conference invites to the tribal partners. So for our EPS hearings, we won't have had any formal notice go to tribes yet, but that is a technical one that I think we could really see some improvement. So we switch up who does our pre-hearings and who covers our EPSs. So just, I think as the managing attorney in our division, I can just do a better job of that personally. So we can do that in Yellowstone. And then we talked about our reunification rates in Yellowstone and some of the reasons that Brooke and I believe, and Ms. Copenhaver believe that our rates are pretty good here in Yellowstone. We talked about tribal consultation and then status hearings as two ways that's, and then Brooke mentioned the key components of ICWA courts that you can put into other courts that are not technically ICWA courts. So that's primarily what we talked about, right, gang?
This is Bobby. We were in the QEW breakout room, and I think our primary concern was with active efforts, how we feel like the Department of Family Services folks don't always know what that means and what active efforts should happen to help people, and documenting how they don't document, and how do you get training. And Julie noticed that yes, there are opportunities out there for education on active efforts, but they're not required. And I know that DFS and lots of us are, well, I'm too busy. I can't do it. I don't have time. But if it's required, you find time.
Thank you, Bobby. Can I cold call on my friend Kathy? Kathy Boss Ribs?
So I was in the QEW room also, and that's basically what we talked about was active efforts, how some of the state workers are not required to take training on ICWA. So that they have a better knowledge of what all involves ICWA cases, what steps to take, what needs to be done. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
How about from a tribal perspective? So if you think about your work as a.
So from a tribal perspective, I find that some, not all, state workers say that they do active efforts, but really all they do is make a phone call to a couple of relatives that the parents provide, and that's their active effort. They don't, like up here, we offer rides to and from their appointments for like that's all included on their treatment plans, CD, eval, mental health, parenting. We offer rides for visits. I get it that they have a lot of cases that they really can't do that, but we also have a lot of cases. I have 128 cases that I do myself, but I mean, the state workers can provide more active efforts on my part. Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
And then
And
Sheldon,
just
Raylan, didn't know if you wanted to share, Raylan. And then after Raylan, we'll need to wrap up. It's time flies. Raylan.
Yep. So I am a CPS worker in Eastern Montana, and I chose to go to QEW, mostly because I just made some comments about it, and so I definitely think that I personally feel there is a disconnect in understanding what active efforts mean. Absolutely. One of the things that Bobby brought up was, she has been an QEW in other states where the worker provided a extensive, comprehensive list. And I wish, as a CPS worker, and I know I'm one of many, many, that we could have more, like, what does it specifically mean? And furthermore, every single tribe has a different standard of what active efforts mean because their culture is different. And what does that look like? And I gave the example of, I worked with a tribe in Oklahoma where it came right down to it in the termination hearing, where the parents' counsel, she or he really got after the ICWA expert because she was on my side and that I had done active efforts, and he didn't believe that because his client didn't believe it. And she was like, oh, no. She stayed in contact with us. This is what active efforts are according to our tribal culture, and we're good. And so I think like it really can come down to that. And so as a CPS worker and as a non-native individual, I want to know.
Thank you. Good point. I think, see Jen Murphy has a comment in there about need to be explained, active efforts need to be explained. Some state laws actually have kind of provided the ICWA regulations definitions and examples that they have in the definitions, but the regs do kind of have an example of here's the difference between reasonable efforts and active efforts. So Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys participating in today's learning session. I thank you for humbled to do these kind of things. So thank you for letting me lead today and be part of this. And so it's always good to see you guys and learn about your work and hear about your work. So I will send all the stuff that we did today to Shannon, and I'm sure Shannon will forward it on out to everybody. So
Thank you so much, Sheldon. I'm sorry I launched a poll right on top of it and landed on your face. That was very rude of me. So I'm sorry for that. I wanted to be sure to capture, speaking of data, just how are we doing on these meetings? So thank you, Sheldon, for coming and for everyone for participating and continuing to show up at these. We will follow up. We're going to make a bit of a change to our design team. We were trying to keep it really easy and inviting people to just sign up every meeting, and that was awesome, but we were missing some continuity. So we're going to be asking for 3 people to show up for 3 design meetings. And we have 2 people already, April and I'm blanking suddenly, Julie. Brooke. All right, Brooke, April and Brooke. So 1 or 2 more people who'd like to sign up for 3 months of design team. I also want to take a look at the topics together and kind of create a flow of our learning. And I think, Sheldon, you set us up so well to be able to do that. And I will follow up in an email with all of this. So if you're interested in being on the design team for 3 meeting designs, drop your name in the chat. If you just want to sign up for 1, we're still doing that too, because rotating membership and the different experiences of meetings is great. So if you just want to come to 1, you can also put that in the chat. So if you want to sign up for 3, drop that in the chat. Just say 3. If you want to sign up for 1, you can drop that in the chat and just say 1. So that was it. Our next meeting is on June 20th, Thursday, June 20th. Make sure that when Julie sends the Zoom link, that you register, because that will help you get the calendar invite, which will help you have the Zoom link on top. And we'll also send the Zoom link right before the meeting too, because I think a few people had a hard time finding the Zoom link today and getting in. So we're refining our ease of attendance too. Great, thanks, Bobby, Jen, and Kathy. Thank you so much. Awesome. And so we'll reach out and find a design team time for our next design team. I usually like to do it after these meetings, pretty close, within 2 weeks, so we can all remember what happened. So I will reach out to you, Bobby, Jen. Thank you.
Shannon, I just had a quick question. So we were introduced to this through training in my region. Do you have like a wish list of other types, like how many more people you would want to be involved? I think you were the one that said like if there were other people to be involved, but like I don't know how many CPS workers are represented, but just like kind of a poll of like what was represented today and what would be helpful for more, because I can certainly pass the word around and it'd be helpful because I was thinking of a couple other people as well.
Yeah, thanks, Raylan. So feel free to share the meeting invite when you get it, to share that Zoom link. Any correspondence that comes from Julie, share it out. And the other thing you can do is email Julie, and Julie will put people on the list. And so all of the announcements go out. So there's 2 ways to do that. And Julie, I should have your email memorized by now. It's J Burke
3, and
Three.
it's JBURK, no E, 3 at mt.gov.
Okay, so I put that in the chat. Julie is a point of contact for helping get people here. And thank you for staying a few minutes late. We have 10. If you can do the poll, great. Otherwise, if you want to stay on and chat with us, we'll hang on here for a few minutes. And I'll follow up with all of the things that Sheldon shared with us. And we will see you in June. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheldon. And
Thank you, everyone.
we should have a debrief.
Yeah, we can chat for a few, Julie.
I-
Sheldon too, if you're
I-
welcome, or if you need to
Yeah.
run.
No, I have time. Happy to debrief.
Great. Joan, I'm so sorry we weren't able to hear you.
When? Now?
No, John or Joan?
I was talking to Joan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can't hear her either.
Yeah, Joan, I'm so sorry. We were just not able to hear you.
Mm-mm.
Maybe if you can chat your information in the chat, we can reach out and make sure that we hear what you want to share with us because we want to hear it. So,
How frustrating.
all right, that's very frustrating. Well, Joan, you're welcome to stay and listen in as we kind of talk about the meeting. Maybe Joan can't hear us.
Um,
Okay. Sorry, Joan. I don't know if you can see the chat. Yeah, we can't hear you.
yeah.
All right, let's follow up with Joan. Do you have Joan's contact info, somebody?
I do.
Okay, great. Well, we'll follow up with Joan and make sure that we hear what she has to say.
Yeah. Mhm.
So you're welcome to listen in, Joan, if you can hear us. All right, so just we're going to debrief a little bit here. How was that for you, Sheldon?
I think it went well. Like I feel like there's some good interactions. I don't think we have. There's technology stuff that always happens, so that's always a rough deal. But I think it went well, and we got good feedback. I feel like we got some good steps. I guess I should have been a little bit more thoughtful about, like when we were talking about the technical approaches. I know tribal court transfer ended up being the lowest. Like we need to work on that the most. And I don't think that's necessarily, I don't know, like I guess we'd have to be really thoughtful if that ends up kind of being something that drives our work. Um, I guess being really thoughtful about why we want to do that and how we do that. And so if that ends up being something, I think a couple of those areas would need a little bit more digging to as well. So active efforts seems like that was a big thing that people left and talked about in their chat rooms. And so we could peel that back a little bit too. So
I was in the group, the QEW group that was talking about how I mentioned that CIP through John and U of M, and we worked with some QEWs from Northern Cheyenne and Crow and U of M to put together our ICWA basics and QEW trainings that are on CIP's website. And someone suggested that perhaps the state ICWA law should be changed to require CPS to take ICWA training. And it was Roberta who suggested that. And she said, because everybody just says, oh, I don't have time. And that seems like it's a huge need. And and I don't, yeah. I don't know if we could talk to Nikki about perhaps requiring CPS, her folks to take our training or another training.
that's good. That's good.
John, you looked like you were going to say something.
No, I enjoyed the meeting today. I
Yeah,
did.
I thought it was really good.
I thought it was quite useful. What was that about a new law, Julie?
Well, in our QEW group, it was suggested that perhaps the Montana ICWA law should be amended to require CPS to take ICWA training, because it seemed like the consensus is that a lot of CPS don't know much about active efforts, and they don't know much, and they don't do a good job of documenting their efforts.
It's a good point.
You know, and that seems to be a theme that we keep hearing.
I
And
guess my thing with that though is like with the new laws we're dealing with now is how do we make it sustainable and that it's actually used? I mean, it's one thing to say you have to take an ICWA course and then 20 years go by and you're not revisiting it. So,
but maybe that's something that doesn't have to be in the law per se, but we could just have high level conversations with Nikki
we could, yeah.
about.
I mean, there is an available course.
Because that seems to, I'm sure that's an ongoing need. I mean, as turnover occurs, they're always going to be needed to be trained in active efforts. But somebody in the QEW group was saying how when she was a QEW out of state and mentioned Washington, that in Washington, the CPS are very detailed about what efforts they undertake. Unlike here.
I know in Minnesota, if you go observe court in Minnesota, it's kind of a whole different, especially the ICWA courts in Minnesota, Hennepin County very specifically, I would say watch them. The judge actually shows up in a very different way there. And I guess it's like kind of like a solution. He's solving problems from the bench as opposed to making like, I'm going to find active efforts today. Like as issues come up, like, hey, even like, hey, we can't get into housing and we're trying to get into housing and I'm trying to save up money for a deposit, you know, he'll order that from the bench as a part of active efforts. He'll say, oh, Mr. Spotted Elk, the dad here is trying to get into housing. He needs $900 for the deposit. Agency, I'm ordering you guys to do this as part of your active efforts. And so like really like solving problems from the bench. And I think as like, especially this area of law, I think some of that's kind of needed in some ways actually to really facilitate a pathway forward of like, you haven't done it, you haven't made active efforts, but part of the active efforts finding is now you need to do $900 for a deposit for Mr. Spotted Elk, you know, to get into this house, you know, so. But they really facilitate stuff from the bench way different than a lot of other courts jurisdictions. So. But I guess also the agency has money very specifically. They've been allocated funds for stuff like that, for that to happen. Otherwise, that wouldn't. I guess it wouldn't happen. A lot of jurisdictions doesn't happen. I thought, I don't know, my hope with this, and thanks for asking, and my hope for this is I do think we have some things here that can kind of help facilitate those next steps and kind of help us dig deeper on like very specific areas of practice and whatever it is. Like I like the comments that Heather mentioned. She kind of mentioned some really good things and some concrete things about